Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we are really pleased to be joined today by a distinguished climate scientist who participated with several hundred scientists in a call for the declaration of a climate catastrophe in the latest issue of Scientific America. The article is called The Climate Emergency 2020 in Review. And the article points to more than $46 billion in damages in the United States, wildfires that burn more than 4 million acres in California, and it declares that the climate emergency has arrived and is accelerating more rapidly than most climate scientists anticipated. And we're pleased to have William Ripple. He's Distinguished Professor of Ecology at Oregon State University. He's also the director of the Alliance of World Scientists and the lead author of the report, World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency. Bill, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, your article is incredibly important for everybody to read, and we'll be providing a link to it. But can I just first ask you, we've heard that 2020 tied 2016 in terms of being the hottest year in the world. But can you summarize briefly how bad 2020 was for the global environment?
Well, Mitch, 2020 was a bad year for climate change, and there was much human suffering. And when people ask me, is this going to be the new normal? I reply with a no. I said, this is not the new normal. Climate impacts will be much worse than we have seen this year.
So can you tell me what 2 or 3 key events during the last year gave you particular concern about the climate?
Well, I think the big one for me is the massive wildfires in Australia and Western United States. Mm-hmm. I have research study sites with the collaborator in Australia, and those burned up along with a whole lot of other things. And then these fires this last summer in the United States were very close to me personally. They burned in Western Oregon, where we had some of the biggest fires in recent history. So that's one thing. The fires are really influencing my thinking, and I ended up walking through a lot of the rubble in some of the small communities that burned. Another one that's really quite troubling is the hurricanes in 2020. The Atlantic hurricanes resulted in much destruction and suffering to the tune of about $46 billion in damage. So there's a couple of things that are bothersome.
And you make the point in the article that really climate scientists have been probably too conservative in projecting the severity of extreme weather, drought, and otherwise.
Yes.
Are we really unprepared for what's coming?
Yeah, we are not prepared. And the climate scientists have definitely been on the conservative side in their predictions, and the climate models have been conservative. So I expect this to continue to unravel rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things you call out in the article is that about 1,900 jurisdictions, roughly, in 33 countries have declared states of emergency, but America hasn't. Why do you think that is? And what advice do you have for President-elect Biden as he comes into office with regard to the declaration of an emergency?
Well, I think, like other countries, the United States is very closely tied into the oil and natural gas and coal industry. So fossil fuels are the way of our society today. And I think that has a big influence on the lack of progress in the United States. I think the other thing that's going on here in the United States is that it's become way too political. It's a partisan issue. And really, climate change should not be partisan at all. So, but in terms of President-elect Joe Biden, I think he's got a lot of good ideas. But one thing I would recommend is let's get a price on carbon.
Okay.
It's called a carbon fee, where the polluters end up paying for the atmospheric pollution that they put forward.
Now, a carbon fee, and roughly the estimated social cost of carbon emitted today is roughly about $345 to $365 just 10 years from now. So every time we put a ton of carbon out there, we're looking at another $350 in damage globally. How do you envision a carbon fee being implemented? Is it something that is tacked onto a bill, or is it something that is collected by the government?
Yeah, there's a lot of different models for carbon fees, and what they typically do is they start low and then they ramp up over time. So the impact to society is not as high all of a sudden. So there are carbon fees in some countries, and some of them start off as low as $10 a ton for carbon taxing. But I think whatever is done, we need to stop enabling the fossil fuel companies. Like right now, we're even providing subsidies, government subsidies. Billions of dollars goes to these companies in terms of subsidies. And I would think that is the first step. And then to talk about putting a price on carbon as the second will be important.
Now, your article also provides 6 areas of action that I'd like to explore a little bit that folks can take or that governments can take in response to climate change. And first off, let's look at energy use. Our listeners, a lot of them have already embraced an EV, but what other kinds of activities should they be considering to lower their carbon footprint?
Well, individuals lowering carbon footprint is really important to do. And I think it's transportation is a big one, as you mentioned. So an electric vehicle, but more so than that is just move around less. Instead of traveling to a meeting, do it on Zoom or some other call form, rather than going to an international vacation spot, vacation locally. There's beautiful nature throughout this country, and there's plenty of vacation spots that are close to home. And I think another big one is just to reduce material consumption of all kinds, rather than constantly purchasing things. Think of ways that you can get by without products, or borrow them or rent them, rather than purchase new materials. Also, yeah, and speaking of that, I'm thinking of just buying used or pre-owned material and products.
You also talk about short-lived pollutants, and Earth911 has covered, for instance, hydrofluorocarbons and soot from poorly made cook stove. Would a wealthy nation investment in low-income nations to get them, for instance, better cook stoves to reduce soot be an important interim step towards reducing our environmental impact?
Well, these short-lived pollutants are really important. These are air pollutants that affect climate change on a much shorter time scale, at 1 or 2 decades. So I really like your idea on the rich countries paying for improved and clean cook stoves for the people in developing countries. That would both improve human well-being and health in these countries, and at the same time reduce carbon pollution.
Now, one of the other suggestions you make is to shift toward a plant-based diet rather than meat consumption, as well as just reducing food waste overall, which we are tremendously wasteful of. But can you quantify how much difference switching from meat most of the day to plant-based protein would make for the world?
Well, I can give you a little bit of a inkling on this. First of all, before I go to plant-based diet, I want to say that food has a very high carbon footprint. So we should focus on food and agriculture. And I want to say that 1/3 of all food is wasted.
Right.
So if we can just cut down on the waste, it would be tremendous. So that can really be done at the individual level. Another thing is there was a study by researchers at the University of Oxford, and they found that a vegan diet or a plant-based diet is a single biggest measure that can be used to reduce environmental pollution. And I think in that report, they say that not eating meat or dairy products can reduce a person's carbon footprint by up to 73%. So now, for your listeners, if thinking about what I can do personally, I think eating differently, eating lower on the food chain is probably the biggest thing you can do every day, because as most of us do, we typically eat 1, 2, 3 or more meals a day.
I absolutely agree with that. Now, the other element of this, I think, is how we deal with all of the social justice issues that go with a changing environment. Poor people are going to suffer more. We all know that. You call for greater education of women and girls in particular as an investment in both lowering population growth, but also, I think, in terms of implementing some of the dietary guidelines that you're talking about as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Is this a bigger issue than just the environment that we have to address?
Yes, I think it's high time that we marry social and environmental justice together. I think that would help break some of the political impasse. If we can do things to help the disadvantaged people in society at the same time as help the environment and mitigate climate change. So, for example, providing at least a secondary education to all girls and women I feel, is key to a sustainable future. And at the same time, it should not be too controversial. And when these girls and women get a full education, automatically studies show that their fertility rates go down and their quality of life go up. So this only makes sense.
Let me ask another a question about the population issue. Now, you talk about the fact in the article that 200,000 people per day are added to the global population. And we do see some demographic trends that suggest in wealthy nations that population growth either slows or stops. But this is a deeper question. If we don't address climate change, how many people could live on the planet? Do you have any idea or estimate that you could share with us?
So what you're asking is business as usual if we do not address climate change?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a very important question. And I have seen just a couple of suggestions as to how many people planet Earth may support if climate change is not addressed. And there's one estimate is 3 to 4 billion people. Another estimate I've seen is 1 to 2 billion. People, especially scientists, are just starting this discussion, and it's highly speculative, as you know. But if we continue with business as usual, much of planet Earth could become inhabitable at some point in the future. It'd probably be quite a while, right, but it's still a bit scary.
That's an incredible number. I mean, even 3 or 4 billion is still only half of the people who are here now, and that obviously points to the potential for massive political and cultural people. Let me turn this conversation back a little bit towards policy and what the administration can do. The Biden administration plans to offer approximately a $2 trillion stimulus package around green infrastructure. Is that enough? I know there are estimates that we need to spend up to $100 trillion over the course of the century. Is starting with a couple of trillion in U.S. spending now going to help us turn the corner?
Well, $2 trillion is a lot of money, and this is an excellent start for the new Biden administration. I think this is fantastic. Now, that said, this is just the beginning, and we need to really come to grips with this problem. And this new administration, I really like the things that they're talking about, and starting off with a jobs infrastructure, energy, or like renewable energy program, and a transportation program, and something that has some social justice to it to help those that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I think it's an excellent start.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago with James Renwick at Victoria University in New Zealand about, and he's one of the co-authors of the upcoming UN IPCC report that'll be released in 2021. He actually is feeling fairly positive about government reaction globally to climate change. Are you seeing the same kind of discussions going on amongst policymakers that give you hope?
Yes, I'm somewhat encouraged, but I'm still very concerned. As far as I know, there are very few or no nations that are meeting their pledges for the Paris Climate Agreement. Right. And at the same time, some researchers are saying the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement are not ambitious enough. So we really need to see dramatic action at the global scale. And we're seeing greenhouse gas emissions increasing every year. They have not been going down. Now in 2020, they may go down slightly. I think I've seen estimates of a 7% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. That's due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
And stopping to travel, like you pointed out earlier.
Right. But the problem is, I'm concerned that in 2021 or in 2022, we will come back with even higher energy use and greenhouse gas emissions.
So following up on the absence of enough action, what advice do you have for the United States and the UN generally with regard to investments that we should make over the course of the next decade?
Yeah, I think we need to move quickly. For example, there's a goal that's commonly repeated to obtain zero carbon emissions by 2050. Now, that's 30 years away, and I think that is out too far. I think we need to do a major carbon drawdown sooner than that, because we're already seeing fairly dramatic and terrible impacts of climate change. And if this is just getting started, I think it's really important to get these greenhouse gas emissions reduced. And in addition to that, I think it's important that we think systemically, and we need transformative change in society. We don't need to only change the way we use energy. Mm-hmm. I think we need to do major transformation to the economy, to the food system, to how we relate to nature, and to world population. So we have a number of things that point to the need for major transformative change, how we do business on planet Earth.
I've read widely that 2021 really is a pivotal year for climate policy globally. You call for a declaration of a climate emergency. What would that change about the way that government or governments could act? And how would it impact our daily life if we were to declare a climate emergency?
Yes. Well, right now, there is a resolution for declaring a climate emergency in both the House and the Senate. And I think just practically speaking, if we can acknowledge the problem, that is the first step in solving it. So, as you know, there is political impasse in the United States government that we typically see. And if that can pass Congress, I think it's going to put us on a much better track to solving this climate emergency problem.
What do you advise the students that you teach at Oregon State about how to live their lives? I think that would be a great way to close our conversation. If you could share what you tell folks when they ask you about how to live.
Yeah, I think it's really important to spend time in nature. I think, as we can see from the science, nature has the ability to draw a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And if we spend more time in nature and learning about nature and educating our children about nature, I think that appreciation alone can help us have a better relationship with this spaceship planet Earth that we're on board with. So I think if I had to say one thing, I would say an appreciation for nature is the most important thing if I had to pick just one.
It also sounds like reforestation would be an incredibly impactful thing for us to undertake. Do you believe that?
Yes. In terms of places that have where we have lost our forest, reforestation is extremely important to draw carbon dioxide out of the air and to preserve and restore biodiversity and water quality. So, but not only reforestation, I think one thing that's overlooked is protecting existing forests. So this is where individuals can join groups that want to help preserve forest lands or contact their legislators or senators or representatives. I think it's really important to allow those forests to grow, sequester carbon, and to avoid cutting them as much as possible.
Well, Bill Ripple, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us about your article in Scientific American.
It's been a pleasure being with you today.
Well, thank you for joining us. Folks, that was William Ripple. He's the Distinguished Professor of Ecology at Oregon State University, and he's the co-author of The Climate Emergency, 2020 in Review in Scientific American. Check it out. We'll have a link in the podcast introduction. We want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to the conversation today. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. We'll be back with another interview soon. While we're out there, take care of the planet, take care of one another, and take care of yourself. Have a great day, folks.